Welcome to week 90. Cannot believe it's been 90. It's our 90th demo, um, or live painting, whatever you want to refer to it as. And today, because it's the 90, I decided I'd stay kind of big. So I'm working on a 30 by 24 piece of toned hardboard, which I toned with a little bit of brown, blue. I actually take the three primaries and gesso and kind of cover it up, give me kind of a neutral tone. You can kind of see it's kind of a 40% gray, I guess I would say. Now, what I'm painting today is an area called Pepperwood it's actually right outside of Santa Rosa. It's in Sonoma County, and it's up Mark West Springs area, and it's a preserve, a fantastic preserve, really. It's up pretty high, as you can see. Back in here is Alexander Valley, the very end of Alexander Valley. But what I like is this is somewhat horizontal. Then we've got, if you look at it, we've got a nice diagonal, and then we counter that diagonal, and then we counter that diagonal again at the bottom. Now this is a little too centered for me, so I'm going to do a little bit of shifting around, but that's the diagonals for landscapes are much better than horizontals or verticals because they just parallel the picture plane. So what we're going to do is just very quickly get approximately where this mountain range is going to go, right up in there. Then we're going to look at the next area, and that's going to go up about here, and then maybe kind of down. And I'm looking at that angle, and then it kind of shifts up again. It keeps going down, and there's a little plateau right in here is that Alexander Valley area. All right. From this, we can see it divides. It's got a lot of foliage. Then we've got this centerpiece, which sits about here, and it slopes down, then it kind of slightly comes up and it goes down again. But it's got a subtle, the road actually adds the angle. The bottom, we've got diagonal kind of like this. We've got this one tree that's kind of centered. So I'm going to move it a little bit to the left, which is going to be about here. And the other thing I want to do is I want it to get it to overlap a little bit. I don't like the way it almost touches this. So that tree isn't going to come up here, and we're going to get it to overlap up quite a bit. If I have to bring this down, I'll bring this down. And we're going to bring a tree over here, and then the shadow will come out in here. So it's going to be somewhat like this. And then there's a lot of foliage in here, which I'm not going to, just going to kind of say in there. And then the tree line right on the edge, a little bit of trees, a lot back in here. And we're going to get a lot of atmosphere in this. We're really going to create as much atmosphere as I possibly can, meaning I'm going to knock this back further than it is now. It's pretty dark. There's shadow. If you look at the sky, there's clouds in it. Now, this whole darn painting or image is so busy, I don't want to include clouds to make the sky as busy as the rest of the painting. Therefore, I'm just going to take my white, a little bit of medium, a little bit of blue, because remember that sky's got to stay lighter than the shadow of the mountains. So if I have to be a little lighter than it appears, I will gladly do so. And that feels pretty good to me. Basically, my palette today is titanium white. I'm not using radiant. I just happen to Winsor Newton had a big sale on titanium, so I grabbed a few big tubes because I use both. Then Naples yellow. I have a cad yellow light hue, because I probably am going to need to liven up some of the greens. That's the main reason I have that hue in there. Then I have my workhorse color, I call it, and that is yellow ochre. I have cad orange hue because I probably didn't need that, but I put it out anyway. Alizarin crimson, which I always have in my palette. Always have a nice dark red. So that's basically what we're going to do sky-wise. Just kind of get it in there. It's kind of thin at this point. Paint's not real thick. Don't want it real thick in the beginning because I might have to fight it as we move along. So From there, we're going to get the shadow of the mountains. For that, I'm going to use more ultramarine with the same color, even though it's got a little bit of a violet cast. So maybe I'll bring a little bit of alizarin in. Whoop, brought a little too much into it. So I'm afraid that might be a little darker than I want. Let's take a look here. No, that feels pretty good. Let's go with that. In fact, if I mix it into the sky, it's gonna need to be a little bit darker. So we're gonna start with that. Just move it along. I hate the crisp edge that I'm getting. I'm not real thrilled about that, but I am getting it. If I have to, I may augment that, change that a little bit later, just by taking a clean brush and brushing over it. I always hate to have super brittle edges way in the background. And yet I do know artists that have used those brittle edges and it's really worked well. I'm not one of them. Started running out of the color, so I had to mix up a little bit more. And I never worry if it's exactly the same. In fact, I almost invite it to be a little bit different, just because things are never that flat and clean in nature. You know, if you want to stylize, you get into stylization, then you can stay very flat and clean, make it work. You just have to be cognizant of exactly what it is you're attempting to do. Okay, so that's a really pretty purple color. I kind of like that. Maybe it'll work. By gosh. Be nice if it does. Okay, so now let's take the base color. There's two base colors I see back here. I'm going to point to them. One is the foliage in a distance, and the other is the greenery. And then there's little variations in those things, but those are the two base colors. So we're going to go for those two base colors. We go for the darker of the two, which is lighter than this. All right, this is a much darker color than this. So the color I'm looking for is probably very similar to this color. Probably quite similar, maybe a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit not quite as warm. So what I will do is adjacent to the color that purple that I just mixed up, I will mix up a little bit of a lighter color, and I'm using some Naples yellow to lighten that color. Maybe a tad of green and a little bit of brown in there. The Naples will lighten it to the value that I want. The asphaltum will add the warmth. And if it goes too warm, which it looks like it has, then I just add the little bit of sap green back into it. And I think I'm okay here. So I'm pretty darn close. And I didn't give you the rest of my palette layout. So let me go. I think I left off that alizarin crimson. Then I have ultramarine blue, sap green, and asphaltum in this case, and not umber. Just because that's what I picked up. Okay. So we're going to go here. The paint is loose enough where I can paint it in there without having to destroy the color that's underneath it. Not that's underneath it, but the purple that's up here. And, you know, we will augment that later on. We'll get some more warms into it. Maybe some cools if we can, but you got to start somewhere. And so this is my choice as to where to start. Threw a little bit more green into it right here. I can just see it happen. All right, now it's a lot of little tree lines. Let's kind of indicate them in here. There's a little tree line right here. I don't even know if you can see what I'm doing there on this. You might be able to, and you might not. But there's a tree line right here, down in here, kind of a bunch of trees. All right, so let's kind of go. I'm just mixing some of that warmer color back in while I've got it on my brush. Tree line right there, back in here. Whoa, went a little too dark. or a little too dark and a little too warm. Don't worry when that happens because it's work in progress. And it's like the line that I use all the time. And I don't just use it because it's a cute line. I literally use it because I really believe it. And it's only wrong if you leave it. Because you're going to make wrong decisions along the way. Some of the wrong decisions actually might work. They might be wrong in terms of the logic, but they actually might work pretty well. But if it's wrong and it doesn't work and you leave it, then it's really wrong. If it doesn't work and you get rid of it, then you've done the right thing. So let's get that kind of green, which is a lighter color. So I'm going to start with the naples and I'm going to mix it just adjacent to the other colors. This time I'm throwing a little more ochre and a little bit more of the sap green into it. The ochre will kind of soften the sap, the acidity of the green. Let's see how this looks. That's pretty close. My gosh, I can't keep getting that close on the first try. I'm shocking myself. Okay. I'll tell you what I do like right now, the viscosity of the paint. Viscosity meaning how thick it is. It's not going on real thin, and because I don't want it to. So that part, and part of that is the medium that I'm using with it, the solvent-free gel medium. That helps a lot. Okay, so whoops, it's a little too yellow. So I'm mixing a little bit more green back into that color. I like some of the thickness I'm getting. It's accidental, but it's working. And that has a lot of that, what I'm just referring to has a lot to do with how you desire your final painting to look. For example, if you want it to look really painterly with a lot of juicy, it's just a term that a lot of artists will use, juicy paint. Then basically using the medium, mixing up enough paint so that you don't have to kind of flatten it out, really will work for you. And unbeknownst to me, this underlying color that I actually had toned this board, and I had toned this before I knew exactly what I was going to be painting, is really working. Just kind of touch it down. And I had to scoop more paint up because it was getting where I had to kind of push too hard. If I have to push too hard to lay the paint down, I'm just going to smear it right into the other paint. But if I can put it down lightly, just a nice little simple touch of the brush, it'll give me a better feel. So my value relationship to me is working pretty well. I might be able to deepen that a little bit. Can't tell right now. I'll know more as we move along throughout the painting. So we're going to go here, up in here. I forget when I photographed this. I was up there with my son Ian, who was actually doing a documentary on this area, and he took us all the way up to this one area that he knew of, and above most everything there. It's really beautiful. So there we go. Kind of have this laid in, and it looks relatively correct. Again, I'm approaching this much the same as if I were on location. Keep that in mind. So it's very alla prima, very all at once, and knowing that I only have X amount of time to paint it in. That's the other aspect of it. A little bit of the hill here. I just added a little bit more sap to that color. And there's some trees up in there, and that's where I've kind of left that alone. And then it gets a lot greener right here. So I'm going to take more sap into that color. I actually added too much. It's too green. So I'm going back with my Naples and or my, what is that? Ochre. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Don't usually compliment myself, but I'm close enough to where I think it's going to work okay. Some of the greens, so we just kind of put those in. We could, remember when you're painting this, just because you don't have the exact green doesn't mean that's the way it cannot be. Because what you're doing is you're depicting, but we're also defining. So we want it to be accurate, but we also want it to be clear. So when someone looks at this, they understand it. It doesn't get too tricky on them. Now, while I've got the greens in my brush, I'm going to keep coming forward. Now, the brightest green tends to be right about in there. So I'm going to take more sap, add it to the color I was just using, maybe a little bit of my yellow hue. And let's put it right. That looks about right. I'm hoping I'm as correct as I think I am. But again, paint like you know what you're doing and assume you're probably wrong. So that's why I said I hope I'm as correct as it looks like I think I am. I don't know. I will know as we get further into it. So we're going to take the same green. I lightened it. Whoops. I lightened it with too much yellow. I need more ochre. The yellow makes it what we call more acidy. And the ochre will kind of mellow that out, so it will not be as acid. And so people ask me about using Viridian. That's my main reason for not using Viridian. Yet I do know artists that use Viridian all the time, and you just have to know to knock it back a little bit. Viridian can be outrageously powerful. So we get a little bit of ochre kind of coming through, which I don't mind at all. And there's a brown patch in there. I want to get rid of that because I want the tree to stand up against. The brown patch is almost blurring into the tree. So I don't want that at all. Now that's where you make changes. Why do you make them? You make them for design and readability. Those are the two factors. Readability. It's something I don't hear a lot of other artists talk about it. But I tend to. Some of that comes from a little bit of an illustration background where things literally had to read. But at the same time, it doesn't have to read as refined. It can read in its value, and in its technical approach, it can be somewhat abstracted, which makes it, from my opinion, it makes it more fun to look at. I mean, I know everybody's not going to agree with that, but I tend to think I like loose painting, let's put it that way. And so one of the things that I strive for in my work is you can call it freshness. I call it loose. I want to keep a freedom to it and not make it so contrived, so refined that I'm trying to create a photographic depiction. If I want that, they got this cool invention called a camera. And so the camera will actually give you the photographic look if that's literally what you're after. But as a painter, I prefer that it appears realistic, it appears representational, but it has the qualities of paint, because that's actually what we're doing. We're taking pigment and we are putting it down. I added a lot more yellow into that, by the way, just so you know, but we're putting it down on a two-dimensional surface. And in the long run, basically what we're trying to do is make someone look at it from when they first glance at it and think it's, a tree or a person or a boat. You want that. But when they really see it, they see that it's just a bunch of paint put down. I love my first time I ever kind of thought in those terms. I was a student, and one of my more influential instructors, Don Putman, made a comment one time that he had It was in a show, and he had a painting of this young lady sitting on a sofa in I think a Spanish type costume. And guy came up to him and said, that's a beautiful woman. And Putt, in his kind of quiet way, said, no, it's just a bunch of paint. I made you think it's a woman. And that's kind of what we're doing. Think about it. That's kind of what we're doing. So I'm going to put the shadow in. A lot of times I like to paint shadows in before I paint the objects, because the objects are usually in front of the shadow and overlap the shadow. So in this case, I've used blue and brown and a little bit of green. And we're going to kind of put the shadow of this tree in. So down here. Nice big clumsy strokes with interesting edges. The interesting edges add a lot, by the way. And some of that color literally goes back into the tree itself. So we might, or that value. So we might as well kind of move it back, add a little bit too much brown there. So I just add some more green to it. And a little bit more ultramarine. I'd rather get too many darks in so that I can overlap them later on. We'll go this way. And up in the middle of the tree, some darks there. Some really nice darks that almost start getting a little warm up on the edges, and it helps define. It's probably a little darker than I want, so I mixed a little bit more green back into it. And we'll bring that up in there. Just kind of move it around the way you kind of see it. I see it get a little warmer. I'm going to add a little bit of my cat orange. It's cat orange hue, by the way. It's not, it's a Blick. And I love the Blick cat orange or cat orange hue. I really do. It's a great color. Now, if any of you are asking questions not getting answered, it's because Anna isn't here right now. Hopefully she'll get in a little bit, but our grandson's visiting us and he hasn't gone down for a snap yet. So she's being the perfect grandma that she is, and spending time. So hopefully she'll get in here. I can answer some of the questions that might be popping up. Probably are. So I just wanted you guys to know that we're not ignoring you. God knows, I don't want to ignore you. Got to move that brush. If you notice, and I'm augmenting the color a lot. I just picked up a lot more orange, a little bit more ochre now. I didn't. The value of the color of the orange was good, but I didn't like the value. So we're coming down in here. Got some beautiful brighter colors down in there eventually. Got a lot of dark up in here. I just noticed that. A lot more than I had indicated initially. And that is from this point, about up in here, down here, all over the place. So what I'm doing is, so my colors say somewhat neutral. I'm using a lot of the blue. Either I'm using the green and the alizarin, or I'm switching over and using the blue and the asphaltum. Both will give me a really nice neutral, because both are basically complements, and they're working to kind of gray the color down. And if I want it to be cooler, I let more of the cool color comes. If I want it to be warmer, I let more of the warm color happen in. And this is where you kind of push paint into paint. It's the fun part. It's where I used to be afraid of this. Now I'm not afraid of it, because I always figure I can fix it if it doesn't work. So there's part of that tree. Let's leave it alone, because I don't want to spend a lot of time in that. I want the color I'm using now, which is not all the way to the darkest color. If I mellow that out just a little bit with that other green, I can probably start putting, yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to add a little more blue to it. But I can probably start hitting some of those trees. Now, paint was a little too dry, so I added more medium. And by adding more medium, it'll go down without pushing itself into the paint. I can actually lay it on top of. This is kind of drawing to a degree. I'm drawing the shapes of those mountains that are defined by the trees sitting on the top of it. So I'm just step back for a second. And the reason I step back, look at the value relationships. I'm happy with it. I think their values are working fine. I don't find it to be a problem. So I'm going to go for those trees right there. Bring it down. And I'd rather paint a little too much than a little too little. Let me explain what I mean by that. I'd rather have covered the surface and be able to come back over it and correct it later. That's what I mean by paint a little too much. Stepping back one more time. Okay. When I step back, I'm stepping back maybe 5 feet. And I was telling a class of mine this last week, I tend to step back a lot. If people ever watch me paint on location, particularly, even in the studio, but on location even more so, I'm probably stepping back every 2 to 5 minutes, just so I can see how things are going. Some of the pine trees that stick up, just indicate them with a different kind of a stroke. Step back, still looks okay. Okay, not as dark as the darks up here, but it's got to be dark enough. So we're going to bring it down here, and right at this point, right about here, is a big mass of trees. And let's see, from here, we're going to take it down here, down below this, which is what we're doing right now. Got to bring some more green in there. I can see it right now. I didn't paint the green down far enough. But I'm dealing kind of with most of these trees. Now I'm going to add, it's starting to feel green on me, so I added a little bit more asphalt. It was for me, for my taste, it was feeling a little too green. You might be painting and not feel that. That's the difference in artists. To me, it's value first, color second. I've said this many, many times. You guys might have heard. And overall, it's value that does the work. And then everybody says, "Oh, it's beautiful color." Well, it is beautiful. Color can be beautiful and not work in terms of value, right? So we want it to be able to work in terms of value, and then be beautiful in terms of color. And so I always go for value first, color second, which means if I need to go back and fix it color-wise, I'll go back and fix it. Now, we're going to get a little bit of a little darker and a little warmer right in here. That's this area. And we're pushing it off to the side a little bit. Same with right about in here. And then there's a whole group of trees. Right. Add a little bit more green to that. Right about, comes out here, here. And this is a matter of making nice strokes, because your strokes is what's going to give the feel of trees, because we're not going to go back and render those trees. You're not going to have the time. This is a pretty busy painting where I think I've mentioned every week I try and pick something a little bit different. Last week I did a painting that did not have a lot of high contrast and light and shadow. This has got light and shadow. So both of which last week and this week are busy. One of these days I'm going to pick something not as busy so I can actually carry it further. Always, the busier the painting, the more time it's going to take you, generally, depending on your style. If you work in a very like this is almost, I saw a painting not too long ago, a landscape, someone who didn't do a ton of landscapes, Nikolai Fetchin, and his strokes are so cool that they do the work. He doesn't render anything in his landscapes. It's just the way he applies the different textures, and it's just great. Just fun to see. Looks slightly darker. Now I'm going to take that same color, same brush, as I'm pressing down on the brush, pulling a lot of this kind of color out. And what it's doing is it's softening the, it's not as dark, but that's what I mean by softening. But I want to come in, not as dark, but I do want to put this group of trees here and the way it comes down. So I don't want these to be quite as dark as these. Still want them to be dark enough to contrast, but different kinds of strokes. Sometimes this way, sometimes down, sometimes up. And that will give you more of the variety of the different types of foliage that you see. I like to do a big clumsy stroke and then come back and fix it. It's another thing to do. Big old chunky stroke and then come back and maybe soften an edge or something to get it to work better. And sometimes you do that and that first stroke really hit, really worked. Sometimes it doesn't. That's called painting. Okay, so I'm going to take the same color, but add some ochre and some more maples because I want to lighten it quite a bit. Still want it to have a slight green cast. And what we want to do is be able to come back here. That's darker than I wanted. So maples, maybe a little yellow with it. We'll try it again. Just a little, yeah, that's better. Got to have enough contrast so it stands out, but we don't want it so strong that it pops forward. So you want to keep it in that background. And a lot of times the trees sit on kind of the crest of an area and they give you the movement of that particular bluff of the mountain. And you use that. That's something you can use to help define the shapes. These aren't trees. This is just a little bit of, that's why I just smeared it in there. Now we get little tiny pieces of tree. You don't want to kind of overdo it, and you don't want to start to look polka dotty because that can be a real turnoff. And if it does, what I will do at that point is go back, hopefully, and fix it. Now it's going to be kind of these trees. That's going to work our way back up into this color. I got to step back for a second, so I'm going to do that. It's okay. I don't see anything radically wrong right now. I see things that I think could be better, but I don't see anything that's, telling me it's just not working. Basically, it's where I want it to be. And I'll figure some judgment calls later on as we get further into it. So we're giving kind of the busyness of a lot of this tree area. And as it goes into it, I want to bring a little bit of the green back into that color without overpowering, because I do want worms back in there. This brush is really great for quick painting and quick large painting. Doing a quick small painting, you don't really need to use a brush like this, like a 12-16 or something of that nature. You don't really need to use one of these. I use these simply if I've gotten so used to making marks. They're cheap brushes. I mean, I haven't found a real beautiful, expensive brush. I guess that's good, huh? That does quite the same thing. I'm sure I could probably convince a brush maker to build on the concept of this kind of a brush. Yeah, there's some beautiful worms back in those. I'm really beginning to see them. One of the things that I should bring up is when you guys paint, and I know I've said this before, but it's worth repeating over and over again, and that is, as you paint, you discover things because you look a little closer. Initially, you look at the big picture. you're looking at the big areas and you're saying, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that. But as you get into an area that you might think of as more refined, then you literally need to kind of go in there and you start discovering things. You go, geez, that's kind of cool. Great. Now that I see that, I can add that in. But I didn't see that before, you know. A little bit, move that cools into your warms, warms into your cools. Very important. Very, very important. It's never one clean color. Oh, let's see. Let's get a little bit of this valley area back in here. Very similar to the color I'm using, a little bit lighter and a little bit warmer. So I just added a little white and a little umber, and that took a little too dark. Let's try it right here. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin to that color. Just a touch, just barely let the corner of my brush touch the alizarin, just to bring, because I can see it slightly. Yeah, that's pretty good. It looks like it goes behind these trees, so I probably put those trees in a little too soon. Paint through things. Don't try and paint around always. That's where the look of overwork, when you hear people say, well, that's a little overworked, 9 out of 10 times that happens because you're trying to neatly paint around something. So you're better to paint through it and then go back and reestablish it. Now that works pretty well as a valley. There is that on the edge of that valley, something I just noticed, it gets a little lighter. So I took the same color, I just added more Naples. So what we're doing, giving just a little more definition back to this. And I'm going to grab a little bit of a really small little brush here, and I'm going to put a couple of, nope, wrong color, too much green. There we go, a little bit of a road there. Looks like I can bring one right about here. And what that does is it starts to give meaning and structure to this area back in here. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to go any further with it. If it starts working, leave it. Okay? Big piece of advice there. If it starts working, leave it alone. Don't feel like, more can actually destroy things sometimes. So don't keep going. If it's starting to work, good for you, man. Good for you. But don't sit there and nurture it to death where you overpaint it. It's definitely not what you want. All right. Now we're going to try and find some of these nice warms back in these hills, because I think that adds a lot. And I've kind of destroyed the green I was using because I kept adding, but that's pretty easy. That's just basically ochre, sap, and a little bit of maple. So that's not a hard color to kind of reestablish. Green right in there. And for the sake of loosening the paint up, the medium helps. It's a beautiful piece of greenery, right? And whether I hit it exactly right doesn't matter, because it could, it's only that way because if I went back a week later, the green, the orange, all that may have changed. So good thing to keep in mind. All right, let's get some of those really pretty. So I'm going to take ochre, orange, warm colors, ochre and the cad orange hue, and that's going to give me a nice orange, but it's going to be a little too dark. So I'm going to bring a little bit of the Naples into it, and the Naples is light enough and opaque enough where it'll give me the value that I'm looking for. So right there, that's about right. My gosh. I was looking at another area, and it gets darker in some areas and lighter. So we're going to pop that right in there. There's a little pop of color back here. Where else do I see it? That kind of bright color right about here. See, if I have enough medium on it, I can just barely touch that brush down, and it'll deposit the paint without blending that paint. Because if it blends, it's not going to do what I want it to do. All right, now I'm going to add more orange. Maybe a touch of green because it's getting a little too strong. But we get these, well, I'm going to throw a little alizarin into that. It's probably going to be too red. It probably needs more brown, but let's try it. Yeah, a little bit more asphaltum here. A little darker because we want this hill to separate. There we go. It's got that nice warmth color. And then we get some nice warm color right about it in here. And right, where is that? Right on the top of this hill. So that's warming up pretty good. Now I just stepped back and everything isn't perfect, but it's close. It's coming closer. And that's what you want to do. I'm sneaking up on, for lack of a better word, I'm sneaking up on refinement and accuracy. You don't want to start too refined because then every stage means you have to go that much more refined. So if you start more abstracted, think about this, this is just logic. If you start more abstracted, then you don't have to work as hard to be as real as you move forward, as long as you get the right value in there. And again, I bring that up over and over. It's that damn value that is going to make your painting work. If it's in the wrong spot, the only time that's really going to come is when you're dealing with anatomy. And one of the things that I found a long time ago is you can be wrong in your assessment of color and the whole piece can still work. You cannot be wrong in your value. If you're wrong in your value, no matter how beautiful the color is, and that's one of the things that I always worry about sometimes with students is they get so enamored with the color that they don't hit the value. And that's why many artists work with a black and white immature, what am I trying to say? Imprimatura underpainting, where you have that where the value is all worked out. And then you go in and you worry more about your color as you worry more about completion. Whatever works for you, you guys, whatever works. And it takes a while to figure that part of it out. What works for me? I'm not an underpainter like that. I will underpaint sometimes in in what you might call a near complement. I may do that every now and then because particularly with greens, a lot of times I will do it. All right. The warms, it's starting to fit. As I step back, feels okay. Now, this needs to be pretty light. I need to have a little more green in here. So let's take that pretty light part and a lot more ochre and a lot more Naples. And let's see what happens here. That's close. It's a little too light. So I've got the brown right next to it and the green, and I can kind of intermix those and get kind of some nice tones around it. Okay. And what about this? This is all foliage. There's a little piece of greenery, sneaks down from right here, here. Okay. Now let's start to get into some of that foliage. We've got to, because there's a lot of warmth and there's some darks. I just noticed more darks there than I had applied initially. So let's get some more of these darks back in here so I could paint over it. Okay, let's start with the warmer. So I'm going to take the ochre and the cad orange and a little bit of Naples. So Naples will lighten it. I could be using white, but I'm using Naples instead. Pretty good. It's probably a little warmer than it needs to be. So just by pushing down the brush, I pull more of the green out, and we can get there. So now we got some warms that are not too warm down in here, up here, and some prettier warms, meaning clearer, right in here. And it was blending in, so I had to add more medium. Always that's the case. If you're pushing your paint and it's pushing down into that color, it means you need more medium in your paint if you're painting over wet areas. I like wet into wet, so I like painting. Some artists will paint what I call tile painting. I don't do that. I don't like the look of it, although I do know artists that do it and it looks beautiful. I've tried it. I've never been real successful at that. So I work paint on top of paint a lot. And for me, it's more fun. It's that simple. It's more fun. You push a color and let it smear into another one. And if it doesn't work, you kind of wipe it out and you do it a different way. You kind of, what was that old great Dan McCall line about learning to paint is like learning to sneak into a ballpark. You try this, it doesn't work. You try that, it doesn't work. Eventually you try enough things and you find your way in. Painting is kind of the same thing. So I enjoy that line means a lot to me. I remember a lecture that I had Dan come and give it at the Academy. And since he had gone there a little bit, he was very happy to come and give a talk. But one of the things that was the line that he used there. And one of the ladies in the audience was really, hi, is that Jude? Hi, Jude, you want to finish my painting?
I'll have to answer questions after, sorry.
Yeah, that's what I told him.
Okay.
So I've got a year and a half old art critic here. So I better do really good. One thing that Dan and I were talking about our grandson is he's loud. He's not afraid of volume. And I don't know who he gets that from. Although I've been told I can be kind of loud, so maybe it's me. The only reason that I'm kind of loud is a lot of times I'm addressing a class or an audience, and the microphone isn't that great. So let me step back. That might be a little too light, just a quick assessment, but I can actually just drag a dirtier brush with some pigment over it here and there and pull it out. So I'm going to leave it alone and assume that that is basically going to work, even though I know there's things I need to do with it. And we need some linear snaps in there to give a tree trunk, feeling of a tree trunk here and there. So that's important. So let's keep moving. I just want to keep everything going, and within the next 10 minutes, hopefully I can have everything covered. Then I can worry about going back and dealing with what we might want to call refinements. But if I don't get my lay-in, you got nothing to refine. So you got to get enough of your lay-in in. If I try and finish every little area as I move along, I'll end up with a couple of really nice areas, and then the rest of the painting won't work at all. So I find it's best, and I do know artists that don't do this. I have friends, good artists, that don't bring their painting up as a total unit. They finish an area and move on to another area. I have done that as an illustrator. As a painter, I don't like doing that. I don't enjoy it. And part of painting for me is enjoyment. So I like my paintings to emerge. If that means anything to any of you guys, hopefully it does. I know what I mean. Okay, I sure messed up that paint rag. So we want to get a little bit lighter in here now. That's light. There's some darks back in there. But basically, so I move back into my Naples range. Pretty good. probably a little too light, maybe. Bring some ochre back into it. So it's good, same color range. Just barely let it push into that paint and let the one piece of paint blending into the other create the illusion of the foliage. And this actually comes all the way over. There's some darks that I've got to put in here, and I'm moving things around a lot. So a lot of this stuff isn't in the exact spot that it might be in. That's a good example of paint going into paint and allowing the fact that it had a nice underpainting made it work. All right. You have to ask yourself, you're evaluating as you work, particularly on quick ones. In a studio painting, you can evaluate, sit back, have a cup of coffee, evaluate some more. In a plein air piece, you're evaluating as you go. And my evaluation is overall, it's okay. You know, I say that probably too much. I don't see major problems. Let's put it that way. I want to intermingle as much warm and cool and feeling of light. There's a feeling of this tree here on this side. The light is coming from the side, by the way. How do we know that? It's coming from above. We see the cast shadow from that. That helps a lot. That really helps define. Now there's some other areas back in here, which I really need to clarify. And it's like right there, right above this. Okay, even look. There are some roads in there too, and hopefully I'll get into those because some of those roads, some of that information is going to help a lot. A little bit warmer. Don't like the coolness of that. Now this area, by the way, during our fires, these areas, I mean, this was saved, believe it or not. And as high up as it is, it's amazing. It's right next to, Pepperwood is right almost adjacent to Safari West, which is pretty popular here where they have a lot of wild animals. In fact, I've done a couple paintings. One of my demos was from there of the water buffalo. So that's busy, but it's starting to get the right feeling. Okay. So without dwelling, let's move down to the main big tree, this down in here. It's going to be kind of important. So let's get into that. A lot more yellow and more ochre. Okay. A little bit more yellow, a little white, a little green. Still has to have that green characteristic, but not acidy. All right. So that's probably warmer now that I look at it on the edge. So let's see if we can get some of these edges in there. So medium, got to add medium. Okay. A lot of ochre in this. Throw a little bit more orange into that color. Get that overlap. Remember, I wanted that tree to come up higher and overlap this background. You step back. It's okay. I don't know how knocked out I am about the color. Value seems to be okay. I need more color movement, meaning warms, cools, things of that nature. That feels like I need it for sure. And I'm being a little timid. I need to move a little bit more aggressively. As we move down, I can see it get warmer and not quite as light down in here. Move down. As this color kind of comes down, it isn't quite as intense. So my value changes. The darks, as I step back, the darks feel pretty good up in that area, maybe a little too overly pronounced. And I might need to kind of just knock over them just a little bit here and there so they don't come off so strong. And it begins to fade. It's not, we don't have as much light happening on the right side of the tree, very simply because the light is literally coming from the left. For a little bit of orange. I feel like I'm staying with the same color too much, so I need to kind of move around a little bit. Well, some nice little warm colors. Right, top of the tree, a little bit more definition. So I'm going to add just a touch of white to that color. There we go. That helped. Step back. Okay. This is way too dense right in here. I can tell right now. And so what I would do with that, when it gets too dense, is I go back to my darks, blue and brown, maybe a little green. And we start to break it up. So if it's pretty easy, you just and by layering, sometimes you get some of the most interesting mixtures that what one color mixes into another. And it's, I don't plan it, it just happens. Down in here. Now, I just noticed this, as we moved down into this section down here, it gets a lot more green. So I took some more green, mixed it into that color, but it's got to be light enough so it does stand out. It's right about it. That's pretty good right about there. So we're going to go. And I'm going to take that just a tad lighter with some ochre and put a few little areas that tend to have a little bit more light on them. Actually, that's working okay. Wasn't sure, was a little bit concerned, didn't know how it was going to come off. It's tending to work. I could really amplify some of the warms over here, though. I could really see that now. And I think I will. And down in here, we have some beautiful little warm accents. So I am almost where I want to be. I'm about probably 5 minutes off from where I wish I was. It's going to take me a few minutes to get enough of this in here. Color and value. That's all we're playing with now. Color and value. You could say technique, but I'm just using my brush as best I can to depict the character of what it is I see in front of me. And that's what you're going to do on location. I brought this up many times. That's what you do on location. You use what's in front of you as some sort of definition as to what you're trying to achieve as far as color and value and form. Okay, let's see, a little bit more green. So I'm flirting back and forth from the warms to the greens. And there's some tree holes right there that we're actually seeing the ground through. So we see it right here. There's a tree hole right there. Maybe one right behind it. And we'll clarify it a little bit as to what we're looking at. Okay, let's move down into this region where we get this beautiful, really ochre, white, and orange, and medium. That looks to me to be about the right color. It's pretty bright right about here. It's a little brighter than I wanted, so I put some ochre back into it. More orange, maybe even a little alizarin into that. And we'll come down right here. Little pieces of warmth happening. Little pieces. Okay. Go back, mix the two together. Medium. And we're going to start right here. And leave it alone. A little bit of warmth here and there. And then we're going to hit another one right about in here. And then very close to it. These are dry weeds, I assume, that have dried out. That makes sense, huh? Dry weeds would have dried out. Okay, now standing back bothers me a little bit. Looks a little too regular. It's kind of like painting three blind mice. So we're going to abandon that for a little bit, just for a second here, and we're going to move back to this color back in here. And I think I am going to get a little bit of that warmth back on the ground plane. I don't know how much. Let's try this. Probably a little too light. A little bit more brown back into that color. A little bit more asphalt. Better. Now, the way I end this is going to define the shadow. And we'll let it creep up. Too light, too dark. So we just add the Naples to lighten it up just a little bit. See, I don't know how much time I have to clarify things at the end, but I want to have enough time to add what I think I might need to make the whole thing come together and work. Now, there's some kind of interesting kind of a ground plane shift here, right about at this point, where it looks like it's, so I added more blue. And we're going to kind of go here. No, not enough. That's because I didn't have enough medium in it. Okay. Here. And let's get it nice and dark here. And blue at the same time. And we'll clarify the shadow a little bit more. Right there, there. That feels okay. Feels pretty good. Now, there is some foliage, has kind of a warmth to it, and it's pretty dark, and it's right here. Throw a little bit of alizarin into that color if I can. And that ground plane is different there. It's higher here. So I can go back with my green. And bring it up. We're bring it back in here so we can show off. And there's some warmth back in, right in here. Let's get it again. There and there. Okay. So we've got the basis of this whole thing. To me, I just completed one pass. All right. Now, let's talk about that for a second. In a plein air painting, you usually get 2 to 3 passes, depending on their scale. And that's if you're doing it in one session. Now, if you're going to go out for several days, you can get as many passes as you want. But like I said, plein air for me, 9 out of 10 times means alla prima, and I'll get it all done in one shot. Doesn't mean that for everybody. It means that for me. All right. So, and I'm approaching this much the same as a one-shot painting. Clean some of this area up here. Okay, so let's start to add some linear information into this piece. All right, for that, what brush do I really want? I think I'm going to take this number 2 flat, and we'll start with, actually, I think I'm going to take a sable. I don't want to use that little liner yet. So stay with the number 2 flat, see if we can make that work. Medium. Naples. A lot of Naples. And I just mix that back into some of these other colors, these warm colors I have. And what we want to do is I want to come in with this. Now, this is where it's really helpful if you have a maul stick, because I'm going to make long, sweeping, something along, oh, let's say, still not laying down. There we go. I had to have enough medium in it where it would sit on top of the paint and not blend in. Now that road is going to continue from here to here, come up over the bluff, and then kind of come down on the hill a little bit. So we're going to take this and we're going to bring it that way. And it's because I pushed hard, it blended in. So we'll do it again. One more time. Okay, I like that. I got it. It gives me a movement and it falls far enough where here it almost touches the top of the tree. Now it falls behind the tree, which is what I was after. That's really what I wanted there. So now if I want to, I can take my liner, because I can use the smaller brushes now. And I'll take the same color. I'm going to use the maul stick. And we're going to bring a couple of these roads back in there. And I don't want the road coming straight down. You see how it comes straight down? So I want this road to go that way, and then maybe work its way that way, and come down and eventually come up over this mountain. So we start to get a little bit of clarity, for lack of a better word here. There's a road right here. And it works its way down behind that tree, comes out on the other side, goes behind it again, and down back there. So that gives us kind of a movement. So if you look at it, it goes this way, comes over the hill, disappears, comes up on the crest of the hill, comes back down here. All right. So it gives you those little things are really neat if you can get them in there. Let's see if we can get a little bit more light happening right up in here. Okay. Now, I've got this liner, we're going to do some linear snaps, and we're both dark and light. I'll start with dark. So I took my asphaltum and my ultramarine blue, and I'm going to use the maul stick, and we're going to draw in some of the darks that I begin to see back in those areas. So now that is more of a tree hole because it makes more sense. Now there's another dark that I want to pull this main All right, there. And I see another little dark right in here, which I kind of like. Again, these are the things I did not notice in the beginning. You notice it when you're ready for it. Oh, that's good. I'm glad I said it that way. I've not used it that, but that's exactly what I mean. You want to notice things as you're ready to put them in, not before. I mean, you may notice them, but you don't want to overdo it in the beginning. Keep things underdone as long as you can. As long as you can. And I'm looking at time, and that is part of my determination as to, whether I think I'm ready to go in and do certain things. Or the more time I had, I'd probably spend time on other areas. So right now we're going to put a little light on the trunk of this tree. Like last week, I did some of this stuff with a knife. This week, I'm using more of a brush. My little liner here. And I do see other branches that are lit, that have light hitting on them. Let's see down here. Now I see right in here. And it disappears behind things. And then it kind of comes out again. And you find it. And if I see what I'm doing, I'm being very bold with it. If I mess up in any of this, I'm just basically going to go back and fix it. That's basically how you approach the whole thing. You as I've said many times, you go ahead and approach everything like you're doing it correctly. And then at the end, you do make an assessment as to how correct am I? Where am I off? What do I need to do to get this darn thing to work? Like this is pretty vacant down in here, but there's some really nice pieces. And this is in one case, I probably should use a knife. Because a knife will give you a thinner line. And so sometimes when I do with a brush, what I find I have to do then is go back and fix it. But if I use a knife, let me grab a clean knife here. I think this one is clean enough. It's a little smaller than I want, but a lot of freedom. It's working okay. I want to go back and clarify a couple of the tree holes. Then we're going to move back up into this area and spend a little bit of time in there because we got about a little over 15 minutes left, which to me is not too bad. So what I've done with that tree hole right there is I created a tree trunk and I defined the edge of this tree trunk. And if I need to, I clarify some of this stuff now. Some of the stuff I'm just making up, by the way. So what we're doing, we're helping to define that tree. Now, one of the things that I just stepped back, one of the things I did notice right now is I can get lighter on the edge of the tree, which is great to know. So I'm going to pick up more of the yellow. I'm going to mix it back in with medium because my yellow is real stiff here with some of these other colors. And we're going to start to amplify the light on the edge of the tree. Maybe a little bit more white into that too. really gooey paint, man. I kind of like that. I'm happy with the gooey, if that makes any sense to you guys. Sometimes I wish I had done a little bit gooier. A few little branches sneaking out here. Let's see what we got. We got a little bit up in here. Again, just the very far edge of these kind of clumps of leaves, because then you help define one clump from another. So I just clarified that that's one clump. It's another one. There's another one down here. There's a little bit more orange in it right there. Over right about in here. Looks like it's another little that I can define. Definitely right here. Okay, that's working okay. I want to kill some of these darks. Now, while I've got this liner handy and the almost white that I was using here, we also have some information in the midground right there. And one off to the side of that, one over here. And there's some darks. So we're going to put those darks back in there in a second also, by the way. This is something you got to be careful. You can really overdo this, what I'm doing right now, where you go back into it and you draw too much. Now, I see two tree trunks that are warmer, right about here. 1, 2, and it goes up, and we start to lose into some of the lights. There's just we want to give the feeling of what is going on, whether we get it 100% accurate or not. You know, that's kind of a give and take. You're gonna get some of it right on the money, and some of it's gonna be wrong. Sometimes you want to invent things. Like I can see right there a tree trunk, and I could use a nice dark to kind of clarify that tree trunk. So we're going to come in. Nope, not dark enough. Blue and brown together. And we'll come in and we'll be a little bit more right here, tree trunk. Still not as dark as I wanted, but there, up above, another one over here. And while I've got that nice dark, let's put a little bit of a dark back and help define. And then there's a dark and deep shadow, some branches. So not everything is white. Sometimes we get deep, dark branches. Another tree trunk. Just looking in here. And there's some little light branches. I want to be careful. This is about as far back as I'm going to go with any sort of feeling of detail, by the way, other than those roads in the valley there. Okay, so now we got pretty much okay. Let's go back up. All right, first things I want to do, I don't want this to be overdone. So I definitely don't want to do too much to that, but I am going to add a few more I don't want to put, if I, you can go overboard once again. So I always put too few in, and then maybe sometimes if I look at it later, I'll add more. And I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and green with my knife. I'm going to add a little bit of medium, and we're going to push a little bit of that in here. Probably should have put it in earlier. Only because it's foreground. I could probably do a little bit in here. Whoa, too far. Is that? Helps loosen it up a little bit too. Okay, let's move back to some of these trees back in here. We've got about 10 minutes. So how much form do I want to put into those? Not much. So I asked the question, answered it for you. I want them primarily to read as shape, and they are now. But if I want to write in here where some of these areas, I can get a little bit more light into it. So we can kind of come in. Probably too small of a brush. I've got a number 4 here. I'm going to go to that instead. That was a number 2. That's really picking. And I don't want to get that picky. The 4 feels a lot better. Some of the treetops that are just catching a flicker of light here and there, I will indicate. Now back in here, we already talked about that, started getting some of the worms in, but I can take that area behind it, behind these trees, and begin to illuminate it a little bit more. So I can put a little brighter there, a little brighter. So it feels, so now we begin to feel the tree. Like I don't like that edge. This whole area right here is too light. So what I'm going to try and do is scrape it. And so it doesn't come out quite so strong. There we go. Feels better. I'm constantly standing back at this point. So anything I can do at this particular juncture to make this thing work better is what I'm going to be doing. Now, this needs to come down further, but it needs to have a little bit of warmth in it as it comes down. There we go. And some of these, if I really wanted to take the time, I would take the blue, make it kind of dark, and put some of these tree shadows in. Because that's the direction the shadows are going to. Now, you don't see them that often, but when you do, that's the way they go. They're going to move that direction. And they're probably going to be a little cooler. So I apologize. I'll go back afterwards. After we're done here, later today, I'll take a break. I'll go back and I'll try and answer some of the questions that people have asked since we haven't been able to, since there's just me. And I can paint, but I can't paint. Look at a hang on for a second. There we go. Pretty good up in here. Up in here. Okay, now I'm going to step back just for a second. I want to see something. How do I feel about? Okay. How do I feel about this? And I feel okay about it, but not great. I think this needs some manipulation in here. And I think I might need to go just a tad darker on that violet, which I thought I might off the bat anyway. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take, and I'm going to, what do I have here? I have a number 8 flat, and I'm going to take ultramarine, a little bit of alizarin and white, and remix that shadow color, hopefully a little darker. But how much darker, I don't know. That's close. let's try this. Nice shadow. Now, let me step back for a second. And stepping back, I like it better. That was the main thing. I don't want to mess it up. And it's a little dark, but I'm pushing it into the paint that's already there. Therefore, that is lightening it up a little bit. Now I'm able to really pronounce that piece of light there because of what I just did. And that's where I really noticed it, where these little kind of shadows that kind of peek down into the lights. I started noticing that the contrast was not as strong as I needed it. And standing back, it works. I'm standing back here. Now, as I stood back, I don't like that. So we'll see what we can do about fixing that. We've got about 5 minutes. So in those last 5 minutes, that's where I'm going to put my time. First this, which I didn't take too long, notice. Okay. One, now this area here, I said bothered me, so I'm going to take my bigger brush, go back to some of these colors that I already had pre-mixed, and I'm going to take a look here. A little bit of the light kind of filtering back into that. Then I'm going to bring some of the green, I want to dirty it up a little bit. Right about in here. Nope. Stayed too green. Too brown. And then as it comes over and begins to meet the tree, to clarify those shadows, get a little bit more variation. A little bit of extra warm right about here. Whoop. Bring a little bit more orange into it. Or ochre. Ochre works beautifully because ochre next to green is going to be nice and warm. This area is a little bit bothersome. Just needs a little more definition is all. It's very wet paint down in here, so I can push, if I push it in there and it feels too strong, I just give it a second stroke and push it right back into the color that's there. That's working. It's working pretty good. When I stood back, it looked better than I thought it did when I was up close. Interesting how that happens. It does. That's all I can tell you. You want it to happen that way. You don't want it to happen the other way. You don't want to step back and go, whoa, that ain't working. All right. And that's why it's best if you can step back pretty often, because then you can really see whether the whole thing is coming together or not. Because you don't want to get it completely done, put all this darn time into it, suddenly step back and go, oh man, I need some more darks, right? It's way too contrasted, you know? So what you need to do is to be able to step back and evaluate and then adjust. You're constantly adjusting. Everything you put down initially will not stay. Very simply because some of the stuff you put down just doesn't work. We needed to break that up. Now, when I stand back, value-wise, it works. This whole piece is coming together in terms of value. Color and refinement could go further. I don't mind kind of some of the looseness. This bothers me a little bit here. I kind of like the look of the valley back in there. I think that works pretty well. It wouldn't hurt to put another road or two in there that I can automatically see, like one right about. Yep. And I think we're just about out of time here, so I'm not gonna. Another little road there. Okay, so pretty much that's all I'm probably gonna have time to get done. I think I probably will go back and add a few more of this kind of stuff right in the foreground, just because I think it needs a little bit more. Oh, that's, I might be able to look at that. Sometimes you can just scrape and you get the effect you want. Should have done that earlier. Anyway, hopefully this helped you guys. It's kind of my 90-minute rendition of a really involved vista at Pepperwood. So if I were, someone said, well, what are you going to title this? I'd probably call it Pepperwood Vista, because that's really what it is. Vista meaning I see far. All right. Pepperwood meaning the place. All right. So I'm going to thank you. Next week, I'm going to try and pick something a little different, maybe a boat, maybe an animal, I don't know. Just to kind of keep things more interesting for me, hopefully more interesting for you, because everybody that tunes into these things I know is not necessarily this type of landscape painter. So I try and do what I think will benefit you and not bore me. Okay. And with that, I would like to thank Judy. Anna's not here. And I'll thank all of you guys for tuning in and kind of watching this hodgepodge of landscape emerge. All right. Thank you.